An unspoiled river is a very rare thing in this nation today. Their flow and vitality have been harnessed by dams, and too often they have been turned into open sewers by communities and by industries. It makes us all very fearful that all rivers will go this way unless somebody acts now to try to balance our river development. Implemented in 1968 after a time of heated controversy over dams in the Grand Canyon, the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act under former President Lyndon B. Johnson protects more than 12,000 miles of rivers and streams in the United States. The system was created in the hopes of preserving certain rivers in their free-flowing natural state. By 2025, humans are predicted to control 70% of the world's fresh water. One way humans are controlling water is through the development of dams. Dams generate enough electricity to power cities across the world, while at the same time they supply water for agricultural use. Although damming rivers is seen as an environmentally friendly, renewable source of electricity, dams are producing large-scale environmental effects. They are proven to be a main culprit in the destruction of aquatic habitat. Through releasing water in unnatural flow regimes, dams reduce the amount of nutrient-rich sediment essential for replenishing beaches and sandbars, both of which are essential to aquatic ecosystems. Many native species that have adapted to cold, murky, turbulent waters face destruction of their habitat through the harnessing of river water by dams. Another drawback to dams is the reservoirs they create allow non-native species to enter rivers. These non-native species often compete aggressively with native species of the river whose specific niche has been destroyed by damming. While impacts from damming have been seen across the world, some of the most extensive scars of environmental modification are found in the southwestern United States. The lower basin of the Colorado River, specifically stretching 280 miles south from Glen Canyon Dam to Lake Mead, is home to the Grand Canyon. First discovered by John Wesley Powell in 1869, the lower portion of the Colorado River was one of the last regions untouched by humans. What we know of the Colorado River is vastly different from what John Wesley Powell saw. With 15 dams on the main river and many more on its tributaries, the Colorado River system is one of the most heavily developed rivers in the world. I was fortunate enough to spend 5 days boating down the Colorado River from Whitmore Wash to Lake Mead last May. During my trip, I learned a little bit about the history of the Grand Canyon and Colorado River, ranging from Powell's discovery to the construction of dams in the mid-20th century. Our guides talked a lot about the negative effects the numerous dams have on the river ecosystem. My eyes were opened up firsthand to the way human actions directly impact the natural world. The Colorado River remained fundamentally untouched by humans until the construction of the Hoover Dam in 1935, forming the reservoir Lake Mead. About 30 years later, in 1963, the Glen Canyon Dam was completed, creating the reservoir Lake Powell and changing the ecosystem of the Colorado River forever. Today, the flow of the Grand Canyon is completely dependent on the release of water from Lake Powell. Pre-damming, in its natural state, the Colorado River released on average 80,000 cubic feet per second daily, carrying 0.38 million tons of silt and sand down in its path. Today, the dammed river now only releases between 4,000 and 20,000 cubic feet per second, fostering several environmental problems. The Colorado River is so exploited that much of the water released from the Glen Canyon Dam does not reach the ocean for the majority of the year. The Colorado River supports a unique biota and ecosystem. However, the river's native fish species have been threatened since the start of dam construction. The 4 native big river species, primarily affected by dams, are the humpback chub, the bony-tailed chub, the Colorado pike minnow, and the razorback sucker. Once widespread and abundant throughout the Colorado River, these species are now on the endangered species list. Damming, the release of cold water, and a loss of habitat are all primary reasons for the loss of species population in these 4 fish. These native fish of the Colorado River have been replaced by non-native species who are widespread, predatory, and competitive in their natural ranges. In 1954, the Arizona Department of Game and Fish introduced rainbow trout into the river as a sport fish for fishermen. They stopped stocking the river with trout in 1998 because the species had a spike in natural reproduction. Before dam construction, the rainbow trout, a cold water species, would not have survived in the turbid, warmer natural waters of the Colorado River. Held 230 feet below Lake Powell's surface, the water storage tanks of the Glen Canyon Dam have dropped the maximum river temperature from about 82 degrees in 1963 to about 54 degrees today. The frigid water and controlled flow has resulted in an ideal environment for rainbow trout to flourish. As the rainbow trout reproduce and their species population grows, the native species of the Colorado River are threatened. Formerly known as the Colorado squawfish, the Colorado pike minnow's range was across the entire lower Colorado River basin. The large minnow once had a stable population that was sufficient enough to be harvested as a source of food. The Glen Canyon Dam's effect on river temperature has slowed the productivity and reproduction of the pike minnow, resulting in a declining population. Non-native fish coming in competition with the already slowed minnow has placed it on the endangered species list. The restriction of water flow and loss of sediment has transformed the Colorado River into an entirely new river. No longer are the waters a muddy brown color, but rather now a green-blue color. While this is especially photogenic and appealing to the eye, it is not to the native fish of the Colorado River. The bonytail and the humpback chub, two fish adapted to the rough and murky waters of the river, have seen declining populations since the construction of the Glen Canyon Dam in 1963. Instead, fish such as trout and salmon populate the newly clear water habitat, while the bonyfish and humpback chub have moved to the endangered species list. Prior to the construction of the Glen Canyon Dam in 1963, the river gained great volume from the snow melting in the spring. In the early summer months, large quantities of sand and silt rushed down the river. When the water levels receded in the late summer, the river lost volume and deposited the nutrient-rich sediment across the surrounding beaches. Through this process, old beaches were eroded and then replenished with new sediment and sand. With the present-day flood control by the dams, the high portions of the riverbank are no longer flooded. Instead, the lower portions of the beaches are faced with constant erosion with the slow-flowing river. Under the natural conditions of the river before damming, there is little permanent vegetation along the riverbanks. Now we see a number of invasive vegetation species filling the shores of the river. Coupled with invasive fish species, the construction of dams in the Grand Canyon have welcomed a number of invasive species of vegetation. One example is the tamarisk tree, an exotic shrub found naturally in the Middle East region of the world. It was brought over and used to decorate the shores of the southeastern reservoirs, including Lake Mead and Lake Powell. It climbed its way up the Colorado River and is now seen densely on the beaches along the riverbank. While the shrub does have its positive effects, including helping to keep some of the silt and sand deposits in place, it creates an almost impenetrable jungle along the side of the river. Through its dense growing pattern, the tamarisk tree has displaced native vegetation of the Colorado riverbank. Lastly, another environmental problem dams have caused on the Colorado River is an increase in algae. The clear, slow-moving water of the Colorado River creates an ideal habitat for algae growth. Some shallow portions of the river are home to a thick green algae growth, resulting from increased light penetration through clear and slow-moving water. In 2015, an algal bloom was issued in Lake Mead. Harmful algal blooms can have large impacts on the aquatic ecosystem of a river or lake. By producing toxins that limit the amount of oxygen in water, algae can sicken or kill organisms, sometimes even creating a dead zone. While tens of millions of people rely on the Colorado River dams for electricity and water, they are producing large-scale effects on the environment that oftentimes are not talked about. Through controlling flow of the water, dams are leading to a decline in the aquatic ecosystem. The loss of turbid, cold, fast-moving water has led to an unnatural habitat for many of the native species of the river. While the native species are being slowed by the new flow of the river, they are also in competition with newly introduced invasive species after dam construction.